Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just get through the day. I'm Liz Frerichs, and this is my husband Evan.
Good morning.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us today on this wonderful Tuesday.
Yeah.
And today, since it's Tuesday, we are going to talk about surrender. And this week we're talking about kindness. So, yeah, kindness and surrender. How do those two go together?
Right. We're going to get into this idea of conditional kindness. Sounds a little foreign to my ears. You know, like if you're going to be kind, shouldn't you just be kind?
Right. Yeah, that was definitely one of the things when I was studying this. I was like, I'm seeing that kindness is conditional, which is weird because, you know, love is unconditional.
Right.
We're supposed to just love regardless of what, you know, whatever goes on.
Yeah, on Friday we'll talk about kindness versus love. What are the differences? Because, you know, I think it's easy to kind of confuse those two. I mean, I think we see this in the Bible where, you know, some of the examples of kindness I was looking up are things like salvation, which is dependent on our faith, right? I mean, he doesn't just give salvation to everyone.
Right. I was looking at Romans 11:22 where it says, "Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God, sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off."
Well, that's the thing, too. I was thinking about, you know, this idea, you know, God is such a complete person. Like, it's not like he's just kind. Like, there's judgment in there, too. There's consequences. And I think, you know, as mentioned yesterday, people think the God of the Old Testament is this monster. And it's because we're so bad at being a complete person with who can love completely and yet care about justice completely, you know. And we see God doing that, and it's like we just want to, I don't know, our minds can really only maybe comprehend one thing at a time.
Yeah, we're like, wait, if God's kind, that means that he can't be, you know, judging people, or if he's good, he can't order the murder of people, you know, different things like that.
And since kindness is an action, it's always good to see who the kindness is directed to. And then that's when we can start to see like, oh, well, what are the conditions of this, right? I mean, I think there's some general kindnesses that are applied to the whole world, right? I mean, the fact that all of us are still alive and things like that.
He sends rain on the just and the unjust.
That's right. But not all kindness is like that.
Right. Yeah. And I was thinking about how, you know, sometimes we feel like, at least for me anyway, you know, I will look at my life and feel like, why am I not seeing God's kindness in this particular area of my life? And I think that's where surrender comes in. You know, just like that passage in Romans 11, there's kind of two conditions for experiencing God's kindness. There's the, are you saved? You know, have you been born again? Have you accepted Jesus and his sacrifice in place of your sin?
Yeah.
Because if you haven't, then you're automatically ruling yourself off of God's kindness.
Yeah, you're not in the group.
And then the second thing is, are you surrendered? You know, are you continuing in God's kindness? Are you walking the path that he's laid down for you? And I think sometimes it's really easy for us to surrender in, you know, certain areas and not other areas. I was kind of thinking about, like, you know, if you have a garden and you have one of those cool hoses that ooze water rather than like spray water.
Yeah.
And, you know, you kind of wind it around your plants and you skip a couple plants. When you look at the garden, it's going to look awesome in some places.
Yeah.
And then in others, it's going to be like, oh man, that plant is not doing so hot. And I think we do that in our own lives. We surrender, you know, on Sundays and Wednesdays and not the rest of the week, or we surrender in what we watch on TV, but not on what comes out of our mouths, or, you know,
different categories.
Right.
Yeah. We talk a lot about not being so compartmentalized like that. We don't want to, we're limiting ourselves.
Right.
You know, some of the other examples of how certain kindnesses are conditional is, you know, when I don't know, maybe it's because I've been reading the Psalms lately, but, you know, the shepherd sheep analogies are throughout there where, you know, God's people are described as sheep and they're being led to green pastures and still waters.
Yeah.
But that requires being part of that
Being
flock.
led.
Right. Being one of those sheep, being one of God's people. And then we see Jesus healing people, and that's a huge kindness as well. But those people have the faith that he is going to heal them. He's not healing random. He's not like shooting out, spiritual, healing gifts to people who don't know anything about him.
Right. Yeah. I think when Jesus goes back to Nazareth, it says that he doesn't do as many miracles as he did in other towns because there wasn't faith there. So there is definitely that condition on experiencing God's kindness. If we're not experiencing it, like I said, either are we saved? Have we given our lives to God? Are we surrendered in that particular area? And I think the third one would be, are we accepting God's kindness? Which kind of goes along with surrender. But I was thinking about that boat analogy, which we have used several times. I can't even remember where we heard it first. But so there's this guy in a flood.
Yeah.
And he's up on a roof, and he's like, Lord, please save me from this flood. And the water is getting higher and higher. And first a boat comes by, and he's like, nope, God's going to save me. I'm good to go. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think it's like first a rowboat, and then a motorboat, and then a helicopter. And every time he says, no, don't worry about it. God's going to save me. And then he dies and goes to heaven. He's like, Lord, why didn't you save me? And God's like, I sent you all this stuff and you just didn't take it, So I think there's an element of accepting God's kindness too, of being able to say, okay, Lord, we know that kindness expresses itself through action. And so surrendering that area and then taking the opportunities God gives us because of his kindness.
Yeah. I want to come back to this thing you were talking about earlier, how, so we're in the group, we're experiencing God's kindness, and we can always do work to try to see and understand that better. And that's always a good activity. I mean, it helps our faith and it helps our love increase. But it's interesting. I've even just this week, someone on Facebook who, they're not an atheist or anything, and it's this guy I just met, but he's talking about not understanding why God isn't showing some sort of kindness, right? Like, why it's basically the suffering question.
Yeah.
And it's tricky because I think it has to do with this, where the sheep that are in the flock are being cared for and they're experiencing God's kindness on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis.
Right.
Some wild sheep might look at the shepherd and be like, why aren't you taking care of me? What about all of us wild sheep? What's going on? And there is kinds of kindness, like we were saying, that are global to everyone. The fact that you're alive and you have life and you have your free will. And, so there are some things, but I think that's an important distinction to make for Christians and non-Christians when we talk about that issue. And I think it's a tricky one.
That if you want the fullest expression of God's kindness, it's required that you're one of God's children.
Yeah.
Just like I can be helpful and nice to someone else's child, but the most of my kindness is going towards my own children.
Yeah, and what if they were to look at you and be like, why aren't you being my mom right now?
Clothing me. Be like, because I'm not your mom.
Yeah. So, I don't know, there's so many different aspects of this. And I really like what you were talking about yesterday, too, about God's kindness before you even came to faith, drawing you in.
Right.
Because we should, if we're looking right, we should recognize God's kindness. Even if those critical people are like, oh, God's not doing enough kindness in the world.
Well, and I think some of his kindness is shown in his forbearance. The fact that he doesn't just judge us, but then that he judges us a little bit. Like, that there's a difference, there should be a difference between being in his flock and being out of his flock so that it forces us to be in his flock. Because that we know that's where the eternal benefits are. I mean, if it was the same either place.
I think another really interesting concept of this idea of God's kindness, this word I just learned when I was looking this up, it was benignity, which was this idea of not causing harm. And so whatever God's doing, he's not harming, even though, even inside when we're getting rebuked and stuff, it's not it's not to harm, and it doesn't harm. It actually is to our benefit.
Right. Well, I was thinking about Pharaoh and the Exodus, and when the 10 plagues are coming upon the Egyptians and they're not coming on the Israelites, how, it's very clear that there's a difference between God's people and the Egyptians. But God's judgment is so gracious in a lot of ways. I mean, they're experiencing these horrible plagues, but it's showing them over and over, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God. Not, because if you study the plagues, you can see that they were specifically aimed towards Egyptian gods, like things that the Egyptians worshipped. And so it's this grace in showing them, this thing that you worship, I'm bigger than that.
Yeah, it's revealing, this truth, this fact that God is the ultimate creator God, and these lesser deities, these fallen angels or whatever they are not, they're not no match.
Right, and it gives them the opportunity to see, like, wow, if I was following that God instead of this God, this is what my life could be like.
And there's an invitation to, like, they could have partaken in that first Passover, and
right,
like anybody could put the blood over the door and have the meal and avoid that final judgment. It wasn't just for the Jews. Like, the instructions went out to everyone. That constant invitation is another huge kindness to the whole world. But to fully experience it, you come into the door, you put the blood on there, you surrender to God, which is what we've been talking about all day. Our faith response kind of unlocks the fullest expression of that kindness.
So if that is something that you are not experiencing, if you're like, I don't see God's kindness in this area of my life, then, ask him to show you what you need to do, what surrender looks like in that area. All right. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, whether you're going to create those neural pathways to look for the good or not create them. We love you guys. We're praying for you. Thank you so much to the people that have been listening to the show and sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it. And come back tomorrow. We're going to talk about different styles of being kind.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, have an awesome Tuesday, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
See you later.